Good evening. Yes, thank you so much for joining. The talk will begin shortly. Yes, thank you for your patience. Thanks so much for joining. We'll just give it another minute before we begin the webinar. Thank you so much. Okay, it's 5:04. We'll get this program started. So, good evening, MOCA friends. I'm Neil Gibbs, Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at the Museum of Chinese in America. We hope you are feeling safe and taking good care of yourself and your loved ones. Happy Lantern Festival is the year of the water tiger, and we wish you a bountiful year of strength, courage, and prosperity. Since Lunar New Year is a time for new beginnings and family gatherings, we want to celebrate with you, the MOCA family. MOCA proudly presents Virtual MOCA Fest 2020, the museum's annual celebration of the Lunar New Year. This evening, MOCA is thrilled to have you join us virtually to hear from author and producer Abigail Hing Wen and her new novel, Loveboat Reunion. This novel is a standalone companion to New York Times bestseller Laughable Taipei, currently under development for film with Ace Entertainment. It follows the story of Sophie and Xavier, who have what some would call a tumultuous past. It's a classic tale of girl meets boys, boy meets other girl, heart gets broken, revenge is plotted, everything blows up. Moreover, we're thrilled to have Jennifer Wu join us tonight as a co-moderator. She's a partner in the litigation department and Paul Weiss, and serve as co-chair of the Women's Committee of the Asian American Bar Association of New York. If you enjoy this public program, we hope you will consider making a gift to become part of a continuing lifeline for MOCA. No amount is too little, and we greatly appreciate your generosity. Your contribution helps sustain our beloved institution and supports the creation of new online programming that will bring comfort and inspiration to more communities. Lastly, this program is brought to you by MOCA friends and partners, including Bloomberg Philanthropies. This program is also supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Without further ado, I would like to ask my first question. So how did you meet each other, Jennifer and Abigail, and become friends? Was it during a Loveboat summer study trip to Taiwan?
Do you want to take it first, Jen?
Abigail and I met freshman year of college at Harvard, and Abigail, I think I can tell this story, was the girl that a lot of the boys in my dorm had a crush on, that she was the beautiful girl who I had heard about her. So there was a couple of, I would say, there were gentlemen, who wanted to, were interested in taking Abigail out on a date, but she seemed just so just so untouchable to them. Like they could never, ever approach her. And so I'd heard about Abigail before I actually met her. When I met her, I found her very approachable and very charming. But I also realized that she had this sort of it factor where all the boys were sort of swooning and really wanting to meet her. And she just, I think that, college is such a time of self-discovery. And it was just so wonderful to meet Abigail was this rock star who was a presidential scholar. She, was a dancer. She could do everything really well. And I think we were just all in awe of her many, many talents and, everything that she was going to do in the world, which I think she is certainly fulfilling.
Oh, I did not know that, Jen. I guess my version of the story is I also did hear about Jen before I met Jen, and Jen was part of this amazing and true way of just really brilliant people. And everyone's like, Jen skipped 2 years. Like Jen joined the class, like she had skipped 2 years in, I don't know, high school or middle school. And so was younger than our class, but was obviously brilliant. And I mean, people are saying like, oh, Jen's so well read. So we got to hang out at like, I think there was just a lot of us that started becoming friends, and we hung out at like the Chinese Student Association, Asian American Association, but mostly we did a lot of clubbing. There was like a handful of us that would go out to Boston, and we'd go out every Thursday night because the weekend started early, and Boston closed down early at 2, so then we would all go to IHOP and just eat and end up back on campus around like 4 in the morning. And those clubbing scenes, like, it's definitely we're inspired by a lot of that. We had a good time. We had a good time.
Oh, wow. I mean, yes, it's great here. Yeah, you two met in, during the college years, but do you think, the friendship or even, the friends you made during the college, maybe it might have, inspired, some of the characters or even the storytelling, in your, the Laughable series, right? I know there were even younger, kind of characters, but yeah, have, sort of your kind of college experience, yeah, somewhat, yeah, inspire those experiences.
For sure. I think, the experience of just meeting other Asian Americans for the first time and having so much fun together, that was definitely like part of that Harvard experience as well as the Loveboat experience.
And I think, when you're at that age, like the experience of even experiencing love or even thinking you have a crush on someone is formative in that you're not with your family. So you share it with all of your friends. And so like, whether it's like your first boyfriend, or your first kiss, or your first girlfriend, or whatever it is, everything seems to have this heightened importance to you. And the people you shared with in college, like forever, are your family because they saw you go through all that.
Right. So yeah, thank you. And then I know, because I'm sure, some of our audiences, have read both of your bios. And then I know, Abigail, you're currently writing your 4th novel and a feature film script, based in Silicon Valley, and then also as well as producing a grossing tech animated series. And Jennifer, I think during our prep call, you also mentioned that you've been handling many pro bono cases, as a lawyer. So I think, we're just curious, how do you stay productive and motivated, especially, during the pandemic, right? When lots of us are just trying to get by, but but the 2 of you kind of are striving, right, during the pandemic. So would you like to share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think for me, like I love to write. I don't feel settled until I've written, and as I came back from filming the film. I was in Taiwan for 2 months, and I was starting to feel really itchy by the end because I really couldn't get much writing done. And I always have stories swimming around in my head, so I need to get them out. And now that I'm back and I've been through the book tour and the book launch, I can kind of just sit back down and write again. And I feel this great relief. And so I think that's really more where it comes from than anything else, is that I need to. It's like a compulsion.
I think, I think it's important to thrive and strive. I think although during the pandemic, I felt like I was more surviving than like sort of striving even. I remember we recently met a Vietnamese grandmother who was, she was the one who was beaten up in Brooklyn and anti-Asian violence, hate crime. And she told us she'd been working in like a cake factory in North Carolina, kind of when she first immigrated here off the boat. Right. And we asked her, what her shift was. And she was like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. every day, and then take care of my kids. And so we said, how did you feel? Did you feel tired? And she was like, oh no, I didn't feel tired. You just keep going. And I think that for many of us in the pandemic, whether it's you're trying to help, anti-Asian hate victims, or you're trying to just do your job, you're just going to keep going because this is a situation that none of us have ever encountered. And if you think about kind of what you're striving for, you don't even know what it is because the future is unknown. You don't know if you can travel. You don't know if you can go anywhere. And, what's nice about kind of the human condition is just that you see people's humanity a lot more in times of challenge, right? And I think I always think that you make your best friends sometimes when you're the most vulnerable, when you share kind of the things that are hurting you or that make you feel upset. And I, certainly in college, I felt like, whether it was a romantic relationship or a class or anything else, like all the friends we made in our, Abby and I lived in the same dorm for, kind of the last 3 years of college. Like you saw all of that in everyone's lives, and that shared bonding over kind of not so much the good times, but resilience in the bad times is really what's remarkable. And so when I think about striving, it's not so much striving as sort of trying to make a connection with people so that we can all survive together. And finding that community is very reaffirming. whether it's at your workplace or if it's at your gym or if it's just among your family. And we all live wildly different lives, but at core, we're all humans. We're more alike than not. And I think those stories that Abigail tells in her books, the amount of feeling that her characters have really resonate with me, because it's how I felt, even now, sometimes when I see some of these like hate crime attacks, like it's just like a well of like sadness, anger, despair, everything all together. And it's hard to express like all of those emotions, but also kind of have this like movement aspect to it, like your body is physically reacting to it too. And so, I do think that like Abigail's done a great job of keeping us all connected, whether she's in Taiwan or here or anywhere else. And it's sort of motivated me to say, okay, like there is a better future out here and we just have to keep going.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with the resilience point, especially I think being the children of immigrants. We've seen our parents come through so much. And, I'm sure like many people, even listening to this webinar, have similar experiences where parents left their countries, they had to start all over. Some of them were fleeing political turmoil or family issues, and they started over in a new world where they couldn't speak the language. And I think seeing how much my parents have come through, even with glass ceilings and bamboo ceilings, like I like nothing that we go through will be quite as hard. And so I think we were able to. The pandemic was hard, but we had that heritage of survival and resilience that I think really does help us through times like this, and we know that we'll come out on the other side.
And then, kind of just to add on to that, I was talking to like a Harvard admissions person once, and she was like, do you know how I know when an essay is an Asian American essay? And I was like, how? She's like, the essay is supposed to be about them, but they talk about their parents. And I think that it's not so much a good thing or bad thing, but more that sometimes when you're an immigrant child, you see yourself through the lens of how your parents feel, right? You're not so much describing yourself. So when people are like, are you tired? It's like the grandmother is like, are you tired? She's like, no, the kids were fine, right? Kind of like talking about the kids, not herself. So when you ask like a lot of Asian Americans, think, how are you doing? They usually say like, okay, because they see themselves through the lens of like, relative to like how my parents feel about me and what they went through, this seems okay. We're alive, we're healthy, we're okay. But it's hard to take that focus off of how other people see us versus like how we're really doing kind of like in a vacuum. And so I think I appreciate kind of the narratives that Abigail tells in her books, because it tells it from such different perspectives. The fact that you have different voices makes you see how two people can see things totally differently, but at some level it makes you see the characters more clearly, just as it makes me see myself more clearly when people describe me than when I describe myself.
Yes. I mean, thank you so much, I think, for sharing that. I think especially about, I think there's sort of this between, sort of generational sort of understanding, right, of, the values, and especially, I think for Asian Americans, the traditional values and how they play out, right, for the parents' generation and then the children's generation. So I think this probably, also lead me to, the next question. So, I have is, so for the first, book, The Loveboat Taipei really has been incredibly well received, right, by various communities. So especially the Asian American community, since we know, the Asian Americans have often felt underrepresented, right, especially, in literature, in young adult, fiction. So has this sort of kind of positive response really influenced you, Abigail, to write, sort of the Loveboat Reunion, the sequel, or was it something you already have planned in mind when you wrote, the first Loveboat Taipei?
Yeah, so well, it's definitely been encouraging to see the reception. But I did have a 2-book deal when I came out of the publishing auction. So most of the publishers were interested in more story, and for me, I had written 26 drafts of Loveboat Taipei, the one right here, from the 4 main characters' point of view, and I ended up scrapping the entire book and rewriting the whole thing from just Ever's point of view. So the benefit of that is that my characters ended up very well rounded. I knew them extremely well because I'd basically written the whole story from each of their lenses. And the other benefit was that I had so much more story that didn't end up in book 1 that I had to tell for book 2. So Xavier especially has a very fraught relationship with his father, even worse than ever. Because he's also struggling with learning differences and is expected to function in a very, very demanding environment where he's his father's heir to this tech empire, and yet he can barely read. So I knew I wanted to explore his story more, and as book 1 was coming into the world and I was writing book 2, I found that a lot of my readers were resonating with Sophie Ha. They're like, is there something strange about me that I relate to her almost more than I relate to the main character? And as it turns out, she is an overwhelming personality. She's very girly. She was on Loveboat for all the wrong reasons to find a rich husband to marry, and then her journey there is to realize, no, actually she has so much more to bring to the table. And in book 2, she gets to bring her full girly self to the table as an artificial intelligence computer science major. And I think that's actually an arc that's very relevant to our generation of girls and women, and like how do we, and also anyone, just how do you bring all of yourself to the table and not have to leave aside the things that don't conform to what traditionally has been there or who's been sitting there.
Right. Exactly. I mean, so I think and now you touch upon a past, kind of topic about, sort of women in leadership, right? I think, definitely it's been reflected in your novels and also, in your professional life. So maybe, just, before we talk, a little bit more about the book, I just want to, talk about like in terms of your self-positioning, in terms of, breaking through those glass ceilings. But also I know, I think Abigail, you really have experiences in writing, venture capital and artificial intelligence. And then I think similarly, Jennifer, you also have, different experiences in law, technology, and humanities. So what would you advise to be, given to someone, right, who maybe has different areas, professional and personal interests, but kind of hesitant to prioritize or pursue? And then maybe in other words, right, so how can we, sort of some of the audiences, tonight listening to the webcast, like kind of can take a leap of faith, right? Like you, and then dive into sort of the unknown and unfamiliarities.
Yeah, well, I think with writing, I found that after I left my corporate job in May, I don't write more per day than I was writing before. And I think part of that is you can't write 8 hours a day because you tap the well out. And I need to sleep and go for walks and talk to people and kind of refresh my mind night by night. So I think that it's very possible to do whatever it is you're doing and still like write 500 words, 1,000 words a day. I used to write from 9 to 12 every night, put the kettle on, and just would have like kind of a new energy come by. So I say, like, if you're interested, just go for it. And then surround yourself with people who understand what you're trying to do and are supportive. So I'm so grateful for Jennifer's friendship all these years. Like when book 1 came out, we were also at MOCA, and Jen came out and took me out to dinner afterwards. And those moments of encouragement have been the things that have kept me going, because it's not always easy sailing. And there are so many times when you just have to get over these hard moments, and that community around you makes all the difference.
Yeah, I think we're all creators at some level, right? Like we all like to create things, like as humans, right? Whether you're creating like creative writing, or you're creating, at work, or if you're just creating an art project for your kid, right? Like we all enjoy the act of creation. And I think the satisfaction there is that we did it by ourselves, that we came up with this idea on our own, and it's our own. It's not somebody telling us to do it. It's not someone telling us to color within the lines, right? And I think this goes to sort of the natural human condition of like liking creative freedom. None of our parents who were immigrants would have come to the United States and left their home had they not had that courage to want that kind of freedom, right? To like self-determination, right? This is sort of like the fundamentals of what America was built on. And I think that, if you can find something where you feel like you enjoy that act of creation and self-determination, it's not so much going for it, that it'll pull you there. Like it's inexorable, right? Like, I don't know that when I started working, I know I did, when I started working as a lawyer, I didn't think I would stay as long as I have. But I think the work that I do involves a type of creation that I really enjoy. And so even if I want to go to sleep, it pulls me, right? In the way that a good book pulls me or a good movie pulls me, but my work will pull me back into its like, world. And so, I'm Buddhist, so I think that fits within my mold of like fate takes you where you are. Not so much I'm determined to do something, but I'm not striving to do it, but like life has taken me to where it is, and this is where I should be. And I just have to have faith that this is, kind of where it is, and sort of let go of this idea that I have absolute control. The reality is that what I've wanted over the years has changed a lot, in part because of what I know, but in part because of who I am. Right. I think the things that I wanted when I was younger are not necessarily the things that I still want now. The thing I have the least of now is time. Time is the most precious commodity to me. And when I was young, I had a lot of time, and I didn't seem to like use it that well. I don't think like, I even went clubbing, and that was a good use of our time, but there are a lot of times
Absolutely.
I was just doing nothing. Right. And maybe that was a good use. I don't know. Right. So I think that like, your priorities change and who you are. And what's really lovely about the community is just during your evolution, that people continue to support each iteration of yourself and support you and who you become, and not see you as a sort of a static person, not judging you as that person. So kind of like coming back to the original question of like, you know, kind of, well, what is it that can transcend, like whether it's technology or law or writing or anything else like that? It's really sort of this desire for like, you know, self-determination and freedom and wanting creative expression, right? And that can happen in a lot of ways, whether you play sports, it doesn't have to be one form of it, but I think we all enjoy that. And then kind of just touching a little bit on leadership for a second. The challenge of leadership is just that when you're leading, you're alone, right? Like when you're part of a team, you're not alone. So you feel more supported because everyone's in there with you and you can all complain about the boss together. But when you're leading, you are really doing it on your own. And so where Abigail sits, she's the only one I know who's like her. She's like absolutely unique in the world. Like how many like, you know, artificial intelligence lawyers do we know who write best-selling books and make movies, right? Like she's absolutely like, you know, one, you know, the only one like her. And I think that, you know, what I really admire about her is that the journey of being the only one can seem really amazing, but it is also a journey that you walk alone at some level, that even if your spouse is walking with you, even if your kids are walking with you, no one knows exactly what it's like to be her. And so to kind of maintain sort of like who you are in that and feel supported becomes more challenging, ironically, the more successful you are in all the different things that you do. And so that sort of resonates with me now that I'm older. When I was younger, I was like, oh no, being a leader would be great. Like I would just tell people what to do and go do what I want. And now I'm like, oh no, it's not like that at all. Right. Right. It's definitely more like, oh, like, am I doing the right thing? Like, who do I ask? Right. Like,
Right, there
I
is
don't
no
have
one
any
to tell you
peers
what to do
anymore.
anymore. And
No one tells you what to do. Right. You
and
just
that's why
figure
I'm so grateful for our friendship and for community and for that collective wisdom that we're figuring it out together.
But yeah, I mean, since I think Jennifer talked about I think Abigail that yes. So, but do you consider yourself as like a natural leader, or is something you kind of always say fake it until you make it, right? Maybe especially right, I guess for the especially as a female Asian Americans, right, sort of paving the way for really the next generation of Asian Americans sort of in Silicon Valley, right? In tech, in law, in artificial intelligence. Yeah, what do you consider a role sort of in, being a role model, right? Yeah, in that space.
I love this question. I think when we were at Harvard together, we were doing a lot of leadership things. Like we were constantly talking about these injustices that we wanted to right in the world, and the ways that there were what was missing, what was lacking. And I think we would hear these seminars at Radcliffe, like women leaders who had come before us, and they would say like you're standing on our shoulders, it'll be a different world for you. This is how you balance having a family with your work, with your housework. Let the housework slide. I really bought into that one, especially let the housework slide. So I think I felt like I graduated from Harvard knowing I was a leader, and entered the working world knowing I was a leader. I worked for, similar to Jen, that we worked for big international law firms, and we were doing board work. We were running multi-billion-dollar deals, litigations, right? From very early age, we had support. We had folks that helped us with word processing. We had assistants that helped us, right? And so we kind of were trained in that. And it wasn't until I started to try to move into leadership that I realized, my perception of myself as a leader is not necessarily shared by the people that I'm working with. And I remember the first time I said to someone, "Oh, I want to move into management," they were really surprised. They said, "You mean of people?" And it was kind of a shock to me. And so for many years, I think a lot of us were laboring in silence until we started to share with each other that we were struggling. And I think that was, for me at least, it was pivotal. We have a mutual friend, actually. She and I met at a law firm event where they were teaching us how to coach each other on negotiating a promotion or negotiating a raise. And I think once we started opening up and sharing with each other and realizing, wait, you're not getting tenured. Like, you were the smartest girl in our class at Harvard. Like, how could you not be getting tenure, right? And so once we saw it in each other that we were struggling, I think it enabled us to see it for ourselves. Like, yes, we are leaders. We're not being tapped. We're not being mentored or sponsored. And Jen and I had many of these conversations through the years too, because we both kind of sit at the center of a lot of communities. We hear a lot of stories, and like that, I think, gave me the courage to move forward. And I try to share that back out when I speak with folks, like to believe in yourself, to recognize that you bring a lot to the table. I think the other challenge is that the things that we bring to the table aren't always necessarily identified as leadership qualities, right? So team building or being able to bring a group to consensus quickly, or like things like that, that come out of being immigrant kids or Asian American or female, right? That maybe traditionally weren't acknowledged, but are actually extremely effective as when you're in leadership roles. Like those are things I think we are trying to highlight more, but it takes time.
Yeah, I think the journey to leadership, everything Abigail said is totally right. I think Harvard does train you to be a leader at some level, but everybody there is a leader. And so nobody's following you, even when you're leading sometimes. Like I ran the Asian American Association conference for a year, and I was involved in it anyway. But the year I ran it, I just remember being like, oh, I'm the leader. So like, for the banquet, we're going to like, have this huge banquet. And, the reality was I was like sitting in a bathtub rolling dumplings for hours because like somehow the caterer had like, dropped out or something. And here I was just like, making a million dumplings in a bathtub in a dorm room, right? So I think it gives you a sense, at least leading those kinds of organizations, that there's really only a few people in every organization that do a lot of the work. I don't know if that makes sense in every organization, but in my experience, it's still true, which is there are people who like talk about the work, and there's people who try to get the work, and there's people who like to hang out around people who have done the work. But in every organization, whether it's like a cultural organization or if it's like a work organization, you just know there's a couple people you can count on just to be there to do the work, right? And I really just sort of started appreciating the people behind the scenes, at Harvard, who like they had to name a leadership title, but the meaning of leadership was to like work your butt off, and then if anything dropped, you had to catch that ball. Like your job as a leader isn't to like inspire people to do what you do. It's to see what other people aren't doing and then do what they haven't done, because that's the job of the leader, is to carry the team, even when the team can't carry itself. And I was sort of affirmed by that when I met Loretta Lynch, is one of my partners, and I was asking her about leadership because she was the head of Department of Justice, right? She was Attorney General. And she essentially said the same thing, although she didn't recount a story about her rolling dumplings, where she basically was like, an organization needs a lot of all kinds of people. There's not a single person in your organization that you don't need. You need all of them, but it's just your job to figure out like where they belong. There's some people who do a lot of work. Some people want to talk about the work. Some people want to just, sit around and like, throw parties and make everyone feel good about being there. That's all fine, right? It's not, this is all necessary, but your job as a leader is to like fill the gap and do the thing that isn't being done. And so at some level, to be a leader, you have to know how to do all of those things. You have to be the cheerleader, but you also have to be the one doing the work. You have to also be the one who can like run the fastest, but also go back to the back of the race when someone's falling behind. So, I think leadership is a complicated topic, but I think organizational leadership, when I look at the great leaders that I see out in the world, uniformly, they're very generous and helpful people. That even if it's something they haven't done before, if someone on their team is like faltering in some way, they'll just be like, hey, can I help you with that? Like, how can I help? Right. And they'll just dig right in. And I just, more and more, I kind of appreciate that is the nature of leadership, as being helpful, even if like our society doesn't promote it as that.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. I think for just sharing some of your insights about around leadership, and then I absolutely agree. I think each organization kind of will have a small sort of they have like team members who I think we're considering kind of the pillar of the organization, right? So really when the ceiling are falling, those pillars will still be able to hold the falling ceiling, and then but definitely I think as a successful leader is really to identify who are those team members, and then really allocate sort of but also some of those people like you mentioned, Jennifer, right, kind of who are maybe great in a supporting role, they're able to really support the projects and execute, right, and then very detail oriented. So I think it's just the ability to really identify it and then to lead, right? It's not just solo, but actually really as a team, and then but working closely, both leading but also can backing up, right, the institutions, so yes, thank you so much for sharing that. But I think since I know Jennifer, you talk about being a leader. I know we talk about a little bit sort of introduce you in the bio that currently you are the co-chair of the Women's Committee, right, as part of the ABANY. I think maybe for some of us in the audience is unfamiliar with the organization, and especially with your role serving on the women's committee, can you just share a little bit more, maybe with what you do, and then also how do you kind of consider the role of that particular organization? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the Asian American Bar Association of New York really kind of is the leading organization. It's the only organization that serves Asian Americans in New York, and most Asian American lawyers in New York are members of that. Sorry for the squeaking, it's my dog. I think as the Women's Committee chair, we focus on issues of mainly mentorship and supporting women. I think, as Abigail knows, being a woman lawyer comes with a unique set of challenges. And I actually heard this said today, actually, which was, there was a judge who was talking, was like, when women are assertive, it comes off as aggressive. And when men are assertive, it comes off as a leader. And so I think that a lot of the women that I know through the organization have faced challenges of leadership, where they are trying to assert themselves as a leader and they're perceived as less than a leader and maybe even slapped down for what they do. And it's sad to say that this happens, but I really do think that most women, Asian American lawyers experience this. And I think it's important to be supported and not deny those feelings of being like, am I crazy when people like call me like too aggressive? Is that something that I need to fix? And be like, no, you're fine. This is just, we need to find a way to convince society that your behavior is okay, even though you look like somebody who wouldn't be like that. They assume you're stereotypically maybe more docile, or maybe it's more submissive, or somebody who's a worker bee, but not a talker. Right. And maybe they don't even think that you can speak English. Like that happens regularly to me. Right. So I think there's a lot wrapped up in what we do for ABNY. I think currently, we have a lot of programming around mentorship and support, but we're also working on sort of anti-Asian hate crime. Asian American women are affected more than any other kind of segment of population by the hate crime. I think it's like 70-something% of Asian American women have experienced some sort of hate, in the pandemic, whether it's someone yelling at you or someone physically kind of trying to confront you. So I think these issues are important to talk about because we as Asian women don't tend to talk about ourselves, and we don't want to whine about our lot in life. We want, there isn't a lot of like space for that. And so I think the ABNY Women's Committee basically provides a space. And the questions I get from people are very revealing, right? Sometimes it's like, should I tell my boss that I'm pregnant? Or recently, I'm about to leave my job. What should I do and how should I leave my job? I'm going to a competitor, right? So the questions we get are not ones you can talk about on a panel like this, but they're very important questions to be able to answer. And I think it's a safe space where people can have those kinds of discussions as you would with, in college with your friends, right? Where there isn't, sort of like, someone gossiping about it. It's really just a safe space to say, okay, we understand and we accept this. And we'll try to support you.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I feel definitely giving visibilities, to sort of female Asian Americans, are definitely kind of will help sort of break down those stereotypes, right? Sort of in society. And then, but maybe I think I want to kind of just go back to the book, a little bit, because I know. Abigail, so when we kind of initially connected last year, you told me that you were in Taiwan for the filming of the Loveboat Taipei adaptation, right? Can you share a little bit about this filming experience, and then how does it feel to watch your book come to life on screen, especially with an all Asian cast?
Yeah, so it is pretty amazing. For those who don't know, the book was optioned for film by Ace Entertainment. They are the creators of the Netflix To All the Boys I Love series that adapted Jenny Han's work. And we've cast Ashley Liao as Ever Wong, Rick Wu is played by Ross Butler, Chelsea Zhang plays Sophie Ha, and Miku Hiraga plays Xavier Ye. So it's been, I described like just kind of the process of taking a book from the 400-page novel to a 100-page screenplay, and then to the screen is a little bit like Loki, experiencing the multiverse, Loki coming face to face with another Loki over and over again. And that's kind of been for me, like every time I see a new version, it's like this creation that I worked on, but someone else is holding the pen and it's coming out slightly different. But I've loved it, loved all of it.
And then just as a follow-up question, so what has been the difference between sort of writing books and writing for a film, Yeah,
so I am actually writing a couple other projects for screenplay. I've got some feature film and TV series, and in some ways it's like the same work that goes into a novel because you have to develop the characters and the storyline deeply, but it's a lot tighter. So when I think about going from the novel to the script and then the script to the screen, like each of them has to be incredibly condensed, because you only have your audience for a limited amount of time. And in some ways, like writing the screenplays is more about structure and condensing and figuring out like how can you convey the most amount of information in like a 2-second clip, right? A 2-second shot. And so that has to do like you bring as many characters as possible into the screen, or you make each segment or each interaction do double time work. Not only is it revealing the characters, it's also revealing something about the plot, and hopefully it's also setting up something that's going to happen later. And I think that exercise has been really fun. But I think for me, now that I'm doing multiple projects, a lot of the exercise, like because I have so many ideas for stories, is to figure out which vehicle do they belong in and which novel do they belong in too. Because every day I have about, another 10,000 ideas, and I have a list on my phone of all my different works, and I just slot them in to like, okay, I think that actually belongs in that project, and this one belongs in another one. So it's a strange process, but it's working, and over time I think I'm just getting better at it.
Abigail, do you feel the pressure of being a standard bearer when you do your work? In other words, there's not very many people like you. So when you produce something that is an Asian American sort of book, or it's a movie, did that put extra pressure on you because the community's all watching because there aren't any other ones out there?
Yes and no. I think something I talk about is that we need more than representation. There's an infinite number of stories in our pipeline, and we want all of them to be told. They should all be flowering in their own ways. And I think no one story can tell the entire Asian American experience because there isn't just one. And so I think in some ways I take some of the pressure off myself by knowing that that's true. Like I do not need to carry all the stories because I don't know all the stories. On the other hand, I do feel the pressure in the sense that there are some bellwether projects. Like people looked at Crazy Rich Asians and they're like, well, did it do well enough to greenlight more Asian American projects like it? And Hamilton is also critical for opening the door to diverse stories, diverse casts, having general audiences. And so I know that that's part of the package that we're coming through. Like my experience in Loveboat Taipei is shaping the experience of lots of other people. We're building capacity in Hollywood now because we now have a whole crew that's come through and worked on this movie that may not have worked on a movie otherwise. And same with acting talent and all of the talent that goes into making a film. So I think that's where I feel the most pressure and trying to make sure that those roles are opened up, that those roles are protected, and that they go on to find other work in the future.
Well, I mean, definitely, the next film will be, right, the Loveboat Reunion, right, will be part 2. And I think we look forward to the sequel. But I think, I think just going back, I think kind of to talk about, I think, representation in Hollywood, right, definitely, I think we've been talking lately really a lot about, I think especially for the Asian American cast, right, you have Joy Luck Club, right, but, and then you waited decades until, sort of, right, like Crazy Rich Asians, and then I think just more and more you see it's like Shang-Chi, some of these sort of really mega, blockbuster, movies. But I think I do agree, sort of really touch on point different stories, sort of different perspectives, right? So, so no, because, one story or one story line, definitely isn't able to cover it, right? The full experiences. But I think, something, like the Laughable Taipei, right? Sort of the film version or adaptation of the film, right? Kind of telling one stories, right? That also opens a lot of the door that kind of, right, for the future Asian American films, that to be made. And also I feel, there's also a lot of these sort of grassroots organizations also have been really kind of at the forefront of promoting, whether it be, Asian American made films, directed films, I think the Go House, right, have been doing a lot of, terrific work in supporting, the release of the film, but also pushing sort of the boundaries, right? So I think on that front, I think I think we're in a very good position and then a very bright future. But do you have anything else to add, Abigail, just from your, kind of personal experience, working on that particular project?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think the more demand we show for diverse content, the more we can make it.
I just want to comment that, I think it's so wonderful to see the Gold open. It's so wonderful to see everyone come out and support. I do think that kind of like where I sit, like kind of when I look at the top levels of like Hollywood and entertainment, we still have a little ways to go, right? We don't necessarily see Asian Americans in those positions of making decisions. And I think that that influences not just what gets made, but how it gets made. In the same way that, if someone other than you, Neil, was at the head of MOCA, right, things would be different. And so I do think representation matters, not just like on the TV screen or on the movie screen, but representation matters in the boardrooms. And so, I think I've told this before, right? But I think that I've said before that, to you all internally, that diversity has kind of different aspects to it. And that it's important not just to have diversity, but to have inclusion and equity. And so diversity is kind of on the movie screen, you can kind of see someone. Inclusion might be, okay, they're included in the cast and they're included in sort of the production value. But equity means that you get to call the shots on what's being done, on what's being created. And this kind of circles back to what I was saying earlier, which is the joy we all feel is a little bit in creative freedom. And without equity, creative freedom is sort of stifled. And so I celebrate the Gold Open, I celebrate Abigail's release, and I celebrate kind of all these things that really are expressions of her ability to kind of have this creative freedom. But I also wish for everyone else that they have that same creative freedom, not just, kind of at the, at the equity level.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I love that analogy. I've been resharing it out since you told me it, Jen. And I would say if we were to try to put our finger on where are we as a community, that we're still at the inclusion phase. We're not at equity, and it's going to take time. And I think all of us have a role to play in that. For the younger folks in the audience, when you see pioneers, like, I think, know that it's still hard. There is still a fight. People are fighting every day for resources, for trust, and that your support. If that's like, if you're a young associate, like, your support of senior diverse people makes a huge difference. If you're the one in charge of hiring outside counsel, then throwing work and giving opportunities to diverse partners, like, that is enormously helpful. Or even for me, like, my first paid speaking opportunity came when some young women inside a big tech company said, we're paying everyone else, we should pay you too. So there's really a lot of room still for everyone to play a role.
Well, I guess I'll ask a follow-up questions. We kind of touch a point, sort of the inclusion and, kind of equity, sort of the aspect, right? And then, definitely, I think MOCA also have worked with a lot of corporations, right? And then they always have, the DEAI, right? Diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, council, and then, also with the, sort of the Asian American, ERGs, right? Yeah, and then we have worked with, lots of corporations, right? That I think it just only, first of all, they have limited budget, right? Annually, and then they tend to only, organize events, whether it be around Lunar New Year and then around the API Heritage Months, right? And then it seems, like, I think although we are shifting, right? I think still sort of the common practice, right? Still feel like, oh, somewhat, not sincere, or not really authentic. It's kind of just check the box, and then but definitely more of the corporations, and then trying to, right, be more inclusive, right, and then accessible, but at the same time, right, I think it's just but yeah, so how can we maybe sort of the Asian Americans, API communities, to tackle that, right? So or should it, or even with the corporations, right, should a change start from those corporations, because they have the money, the resource, who are in power, right? Or what's your view on that, right? Yeah.
I think MOCA, if you're purchasing vendor services, you could get diverse vendors, like whoever you're using, right, for your vendors. Like, I always ask that. We asked that of the school where my kids go, which is a private school. I was like the diversity representative. So I was like, are we using diverse vendors? Like, when we hire, when we get people to come on campus or whatever it is, like, are they diverse, right? We need to have a DEI hiring. So, to the extent that you can channel money towards like diverse vendors, I think that's a really positive thing. And then I think the second thing is just to support people who you can see who are diverse, right? Like, that's fundamental, right? And it might just be so easy as like including them in your dinner party or including them on something else, right? You're just trying to expand their network so that they can have an opportunity that maybe perhaps they wouldn't have had, right? And just trying to be as helpful as possible, because it takes all of us to kind of get to the point of equity, and no one of us can do that automatically, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also really important for everyone to look past implicit bias. And that's something I think when we sit at the intersection of different cultures, we have an eye to see things like that. So one example I've been giving is my parents tried to get Chinese New Year put on the school calendar when I was growing up in Ohio. And I remember they were told that's really inappropriate. And, I bring that up now because it's clearly, it doesn't feel as inappropriate today. And the same thing happens, like it's inappropriate for women to breastfeed at work or pump at work, and or if they're pumping in the bathroom. I remember hearing people pushing back on that, like, why is that woman sitting there pumping, right? And it's like, now today with our lens, we're like, okay, no, actually we need to support women who can returning to work, and that part of that is providing a safe environment for them to breastfeed or to do what they need to do. And I love seeing like these nursing units now set up in airports. And I'm like, wow, we've come a long way. But there's still so many things like that. Even just a few days ago, I was talking about a woman who's fundraising, and someone's like, why isn't this person going through normal channels? And that person probably is going through normal channels, but the answer is also probably they may not be able to access those channels because there's probably some kind of other things to work through or fights that are going on. And so for us to always question when someone brings up whether something is appropriate or not, it's going to be a cultural question. So that's another way that we can be helpful at all levels.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And then definitely, when we are, I think MOCA, sort of, when we're looking at sort of the, whether it be the funding, a lot of sort of, we see sort of the inequity, right, in funding, especially for underrepresented communities, right, like African American, Latinx, Native American, Arabic, and then definitely Asian Americans. I think it's always, the what we call it Alana, which is the minority, groups fighting for, us. One tiny slice of the pie, right, which is the funding, and then the major findings go to these major institutions. So I think definitely sort of allyship and then coming together, and then would definitely played a critical role in sort of advancing this type of the cultural organizations. So thank you for sharing that. And then I know, Abigail, you kind of just sort of quickly mentioned that when you were working on multiple projects, right, you have thousands of ideas, and then you kind of sometimes will add it to your note. So I guess just maybe would you just I think some people in the audiences, I think they are interested in writing, and then that's why I would just like to ask what's your overall writing process when you start a project or when you're working on a project. You mentioned you take down notes, but what some of the other sort of tips or practices that you do?
Yeah, so I usually start with a high concept. So Loveboat Taipei is a story of these Asian American kids going abroad on this cultural exchange program and being in a foreign land by themselves without parents, without supervision for the first time ever. And it's based on, as many people know, it's based on a real program, a real experience. And I would say the high concept there, it's a story of identity. It's a girl discovering who she is between East and West, and also how do you pursue your passions while honoring your family. The second book, Loveboat Reunion, the high concept there is coming into your own power. So both Xavier and Sophie are working through some of their characteristics that are traditionally seen as not favorable. So Xavier has dysgraphia, dyslexia. Sophie is overwhelming. I actually think she has undiagnosed ADHD. She's also incredibly intelligent and has like this ghost in her past that she needs to exercise. And for them, it's about really owning their seats at the table and realizing like that these things that are perceived as weaknesses are actually strengths that they can double down on. And so as I think about each of my projects, I think about the theme. What is at the core, like what is the underlying story about? And then I start to brainstorm around it and figure out like who's the right character to tell the story, what's the right journey that they need to go on. I think a practical tip is I love Scrivener, which is an incredible tool that allows me to just put all these ideas into files, and I can rearrange the files in whatever order I want. So then I can rearrange my scenes later. I don't tend to write in order, so I give myself that freedom to like write the climax, write the beginning, or write 5 different beginnings because none of them are quite the right ones yet. Figure out how I want this to end, and then like kind of drill into some of the side stories that aren't going to end up in the main book, but I need to write those scenes of like a time when the character was sad or a traumatic moment in their youth that actually is influencing who they are today. Like all those writing in the blank spaces is actually a really important part of digging deep and finding out what is the story you're trying to tell in this particular, these pages, and then who are the characters that you're writing about.
Thank you so much. I think, yeah, those are definitely, very useful. tips. And also it seems like, I think taking research trips also, played, a critical role, in your writing practices. Because I know in the acknowledgement section of the book, right, you mentioned you took a research trip to Taipei during the pandemic, right? So can you share, a little bit with us about experience? Were there any places, kind of in particular, in Taipei really inspired, like maybe sessions of the book or even just your thought process, during that trip?
Absolutely. Those research trips were very instrumental for me. I think
Mm-hmm.
it helped me to be immersed in the world, to connect with the characters. So for book one, I did a research trip, and when I would see things like a passion fruit or a dragon fruit or a platter of fried eggs, I would think of my family, and I realized, oh, Ever would think of her family too in those moments, and it actually works from a story perspective because Ever goes to Taiwan really angry with her family, and so she'll have these jolting moments where she'll think of her dad making salted eggs, and she's like, I don't really want to think about my parents right now. So I think those are good grounding moments for me to understand, like, where would my character be emotionally. And then with book two research, I was really looking for places where Xavier's family would be. So where would Xavier's family business be set up? And I realized would it be at Taipei 101, or would it be on Dihua Street, which is this historical neighborhood. It's still well preserved, but it's slowly becoming modernized while maintaining character. I'm like, yeah, that's where Xavier's family would be, close to the wharf, because they're such an old Taiwanese family. They were in textiles. They would need to be close to the shipping docks. And then I realized that would actually be a source of controversy in his wealthy family. Like, maybe we need to move to Taipei 101 and be modern like the rest of the world. And, it became a central conflict for the family. And then, I had another question of like, well, where is Xavier's family buried? Because they are an old family. Of course, they would have a grave somewhere. So I learned like the Taiwanese bury their dead in the mountains. And so I went hiking along Elephant Mountain, found a grave, but it wasn't the right one. And then I ended up going to Yangmingshan outside the city, and there was a graveyard close to the grave of Sun Yat-sen's son, right? And I'm like, okay, this is it. This is where his family will be buried. This is where Xavier will come to see his mother and pay respects. And then there's an important scene that takes place there. So I think it's moments like that that help me just really connect with who the character is, what their world is, what they're going to want, what are the oppositions, and then hearing and just talking with people that would be a part of their communities there gave me a better sense of the particular challenges that they would face.
Yeah, I know it feels like, I guess it's feel like, like a anthropological sort of research, you kind of just immerse yourself in the environment, but also kind of help you resolve some of, making sure the story, is very, logic. And then, but that's a great sort of advice, that like, to do some of this field work, right? Rather than just rely on the internet, right? Or, sort of, or even just for pictures, or or it's like this first-hand experience, definitely I think plays such important role in your storytelling. And then I guess we are almost at the end of our conversation, but I guess I would still have maybe last two quick questions. So I think just overall, right, what are you hoping readers really take away from the Loveboat series specifically?
So I love I had a marketing gal at Harper tell me that she'd never felt so seen before when she first read the book. And I think that's a big part of it. Like for people to find themselves in these characters, like, the stories, the things that I live, my lived experience matters and are worthy of being in a book, in a novel, and on the screen. And the other part is just the diversity within our community. Like I said, I have 30 different characters in book one, and there's a bunch more characters in book two, and they're all different. They're all Asian American, but they're all different. And I think part of the beauty of having a bunch of Asian Americans together is that in some ways the Asian Americanness is erased, but on the other hand, you also find out what's uniquely Asian American about them. And Jen, I would love to hear from you too. Like, what do you hope people take away from the work that you're doing?
I loved that Asian Americans were going to Asia to discover themselves, right? Because it's like sort of a reverse immigration aspect of like, you've been raised in America and you've sort of assimilated at some level. And then you go back and you find out all these things. And like Abigail was saying, when she sees the dragon fruit, it reminds her of home. And so you realize that there's a piece of home there, but it's not your home, but it is home at some level. And I think at some level, it really transcends like countries' borders, which is we're all human, right? Like whether you're eating dragon fruit in Ohio or you're eating dragon fruit in Taiwan, the smell of that might make you have that same feeling. And I think that's a really wonderful kind of feeling to it's like a big warm hug when I read Abigail's book. I think there's a lot of different, kind of plot points there. But when you get to the end, it's like this like hug of like, oh, I feel like the characters are home. right? They're still discovering themselves, but they found their home. And it's just like Abigail says, it's being seen, being heard, and feeling secure, and that you are, you're accepted and that the world sees you.
Yeah, and you're doing this kind of work and everything you're doing in the law. So it's not, you don't have to be a novelist to do this work, clearly, because you're advancing the same issues in your field.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think, yeah, it's definitely sort of, yeah, giving sort of comfort, and then, yeah, sort of the representation, right, aspect of, for the reader, but, and then also, sort of giving people a sense of belonging, right, at a home. Definitely, that's, that's also what we do, I think, at MOCA, right? So really sort of preserve, the history, but, kind of looking through the Chinese American experience. So, sort of our visitors can really have a better sense of themselves, right, after their visits. So I think I briefly mentioned, that we are right now writing your fourth novel, and then you have kind of your third novel going to be published, I think, next year. I think, also around Silicon Valley. Are you allowed to share, the sort of some of your upcoming projects? Is it still a secret, or yeah?
Yeah, so I can't quite share them yet. I'm excited to share them soon, but I do have multiple novels, multiple TV and film things in the works. And I do have a short story out called The Idiom Algorithm. It came out with Macmillan on January 4th. And that one's a cross-cultural story about a Chinese American kid in Silicon Valley dating a Shanghainese parachute girl. And then she's kidnapped, and he has to build an algorithm to find her. So that one I had a lot of fun with. And, there's lots of different forms, lots of different stories. And yeah, I'm excited to share more when I can.
No problems. Yeah, and then we look forward to, helping you promote, those projects for sure. I think we do have a question, kind of will be our last question. I think someone asked, would you be one of the members on the creative team, like executive producer, for example, for the film adaptation of your book? Well, I mean, I think it's already happening, but yeah, would you mind explaining your role? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm an executive producer. Actually, my IMDb just went up like a little while ago, and I was like, well, it's fun to see that. So I'm the writer of the source material, and then I'm a executive producer on the project. So commenting on the script, and obviously I was on set every day while we were filming in Taiwan, and that was incredible. So yeah, many fun things. I think all the skills that I built in the law world, I use them now in the film and the producer world. So there's a reason for all of that.
Great, thank you. I mean, look forward to seeing you, on the Oscar carpet, when you, getting the award, that you well deserve. And then any last thoughts from you, Jennifer?
Thank you for having and creating this space for us all.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for our community. It means the world to me, and everything I'm doing is for the community.
Terrific. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in tonight, and really, stay tuned. We still have more programs, sort of this month, and we're just going to put it quickly in the chat, and then next week we'll have MOCA Talks with John Wang, founder of the Queen's Night Market and co-author of The Words It's Here, Amazing Food and the Inspiring People Who Make It at New York's Queen Night Market. So, so if you've been to the Queen's Night Market, and then, or even haven't been, please feel free to tune in. It will be a really fun talk as, we talk about food, from around the world. So once again, thank you so much, Abigail and Jennifer, for your time, for your, creativity, for your leadership. And then we'll look forward to, working with you, promoting you, seeing you, strive, in your own field. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Choi. Great to see everyone.
Good night, everybody.